Yeah. What thinking about like deep solidarity, I'm thinking. So one of my friends lives in a house where they share all of their income, and
Ah,
then they have at least at one point they had two bedrooms that were they offered free to people in need of housing.
yeah,
Um, but I know that like people have cycled in and out of that house because it takes a lot of energy, emotional energy, to stay committed in that kind of cooperative house.
yeah,
Um, and I know that the majority of like I've even been in situations where uh, a relative stranger mentions that they need housing,
yeah,
um, and I feel some amount of distrust, and then I feel like, oh, I really don't want to put that uh, burden on my housemates. So like I feel safe for myself, but I don't know
yeah,
what kind of situation I'll be putting them in.
yeah.
So I'm just noticing like I have that deep distrust too
Sure.
of strangers, and I'm curious if you have thoughts about
Uh,
what does it take for us to like hasten how we build solidarity, because
sure.
it takes a long time.
Well, the circumstances that you described are actually rather increasingly intimate. When you're talking about letting a stranger
Yeah.
stay within the place where you rest and sleep,
Right.
that involves a significant amount of trust. So that's like a higher tier,
Yeah.
this higher tier level of trust. Um, whereas when you talk about like economic or like trade and buying groceries and things like that, and putting like a couple $100 into a co-op kitty or something like that for the or for the purposes of purchasing a bulk amount for the entire group, that requires that's a lower level of trust. So there are degrees of that. So when you talk about like the residential situation, I readily agree with that. That's difficult, and I've been in that situation myself, where people on the street just stop me and say, "Hey man, what's up? I need a place to stay," and I've given people a place to stay, and I've actually been threatened with eviction for doing so. So I've been through that, and so I've done it, but it's also it's not for everybody, and it shouldn't it's that it's not it's that that's like from going from 0 to 100 real quick or something.
Sure.
I don't know what the hip hop. I know there's a hip hop phrase or something like. Anyway,
Oh, that's that's you got it.
yeah. Anyway, so I mean that's going a little bit too fast, too quick, often for many people. So it's a matter of building as each person is comfortable and gradual. So and sharing what's available. If we're in a situation where we don't if we don't have a lot of space or we're not in a secure environment or whatever, then it may be less a matter of getting some place to stay, but doing something else. Um, so so that's consideration levels. One of the lessons that I learned from my experience in putting people up on from the streets, yeah, I mean, it got to the point where the cats that I was putting up were referring my place to other cats, and like just additional cats were coming through, and I'm like, yo, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I was like, Peter, you're supposed to be this righteous dude and everything else. You're supposed to make it available, and so I felt that responsibility. But simultaneously, it was getting a little bit hectic. So and I had to start thinking about. I mean, I was living by myself, I still am, but I had to start thinking about like my neighbors and everything, because I was giving people access to the building, and I have a responsibility of accounting for anybody who's coming that I let in,
Right.
or who I let in, who let somebody else in. I mean, that's still my responsibility as well. So it's appropriate to be mindful of that and have due caution at that higher level.
Yeah.
But so that's one consideration.
That's a good point.
One of the things I learned though is that when in terms of like community building and village building, in this endeavor that I'm involved with called UNI Village, one of the things that one of the intentions that we arrive at is establishing a hostel, so that establishing residential accommodations for families, like apartment building, but then also having like a hostel for visitors, and then for people who need a place to stay, a place to crash. That's distinct from the family's residences and domiciles, but it also is providing, satisfying the needs that people have in having a place to crash and everything else. So it's appropriate to address those needs as we're able to. But it's also appropriate for us to maintain our levels of comfort as we stretch out and avail ourselves increasingly towards that trust and towards that cooperation.